Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We're just going to give it a minute or so for all of our attendees to join, and then we'll get started. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining our webinar today. This is our first quarterly state advocacy webinar of 2023, and we are so happy to have all of you for our presentation on building relationships with state decision makers. Today's speakers are Emily Stauffer from the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases, Betsy Trainer, who sits on the board of directors of the RSACS Foundation, and Jennifer Sills from the CSN K2A1 Foundation. Please refer to the instructions on this next slide. And also in the chat if you need transcription or translation services. Today's speakers all have experience working on state telehealth policy. Telehealth is just one of many state priorities that RDLA and EveryLife are engaged in, but it serves as a great example of how an issue may need to be addressed through different avenues, especially depending on which state you're advocating in. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Emily Stauffer. Emily Stauffer is the State Policy Manager for the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases, where she works to advance and support state-level policies that address the needs of the rare disease community. Before joining EveryLife, Emily held multiple positions in the Utah legislature, including amending clerk, staffer on the Senate Rules Committee, and legislative assistant to 8 senators. In addition to her work in the state legislature, Emily has had the privilege of providing policy and communication support to state level legislative campaigns, and also recently worked in the community engagement department for an Iowa-based healthcare system. Emily currently lives in Iowa City with her husband Roderick and loves watching University of Iowa women's basketball in her free time. Go Hawkeyes. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. I'm Emily Stauffer, and like Amanda said, I'm the State Policy Manager for the EveryLife Foundation, and I'm very excited that you all have joined us for our discussion about telehealth policy and specifically state advocacy. So, as Amanda mentioned, the purpose of this webinar is to provide you with a deep dive into what it's like to be an advocate from the perspective of individuals who are engaged in different segments of the push for improved telehealth policy. So before we hear from those advocates, I just wanted to take a few minutes to provide you with some policy context and giving you a very brief overview of what telehealth policy trends we're seeing across the states. So telehealth policy in general has undergone significant changes in recent years, especially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, federal and state lawmakers issued temporary waivers under public health emergencies to allow clinicians to provide care via telehealth across state lines. Now we're seeing the rollback of these state public health emergency declarations, and because of that, many patients have lost access to their out-of-state providers. This loss of access, as I'm sure many of you are aware, has significantly impacted the rare disease patients who frequently travel far to seek care, especially specialty and expert care that is often outside of their state. This also impacts individuals in rural communities as well. So the rollback of these public health emergencies also presents a really unique opportunity for state legislators to create permanent solutions to telehealth reform. So it's an exciting time in state telehealth policy. As I'm sure you can guess, there's a lot of conversations happening in state legislatures regarding these topics. In fact, we're seeing around 500 telehealth related bills across the states just this session. So on the next slide, we have just a summary of several approaches to improving telehealth legislation and telehealth regulation in legislators' respective states, making telehealth more accessible. So in the top left, you can see some ways states can do this is they can create policies to determine private insurance coverage specifically for small group private insurance. These policies can ensure that a small group private insurance covers services via telehealth if they're covered for in-person care, or similarly, they can reimburse for telehealth at similar rates to in-person care. Similarly, states can regulate Medicaid and determine Medicaid reimbursement for telehealth services, including what types of services to cover, where it can be used, reimbursement, how it can be implemented, and much more. Also, states can determine patient-provider relationships and how that can be established. There's also safety and quality regulations that states can promote to protect the safety and quality of telehealth appointments. Broadband access is also an area of focus for states. It's really focused on getting people access to broadband and to the internet so that they can receive care via telehealth when it is available. The last little check on my list is cross-state licensing, and this is something that's picked up quite a bit of momentum in the states recently. As it stands right now, providers often need to apply for licensures, or providers in general always need to apply for licensure in the state where they are providing care and in the state where the person that they are caring for is located. So this can create a burden. If they're providing care to individuals in multiple states, then they need to apply for licensure in multiple states. So there's compacts for physicians, nurses, physical therapists, and more to be able to streamline this process. The Every Life Foundation specifically has been engaged with the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, which creates a streamlined process for the licensure application of physicians who in states who choose to participate. And the compact specifically, it reduces duplicative paperwork for these physicians by allowing them to apply for licensure in multiple states through a single application. And it does all of this while retaining states' rigorous medical licensing standards. This streamlined process increases patient access to expert care in person and via telemedicine. So as you can see on the map up here, these are the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact states. Dark blue are member states, and the light blue are states where compact legislation has been introduced this year. So that is a potential opportunity for those who want to engage in the states. And Betsy, who's one of our panelists and will be speaking after me, has been very involved in the push for Virginia to join this compact. And so I'm sure we'll be hearing about her experience pushing for that soon. She's been doing some really great work with that. So now, moving on from telehealth, I wanted to take a few minutes. We have a couple of polls, and we just kind of wanted to gauge what everybody's experience with advocacy is and how it's done. So I think Amanda will be taking over that, and she'll be sending out a couple of polls. So hopefully that popped up on your screen. We just want to know if you know who your state senators and representatives are. For the most case, you'll have one state level senator, one representative, or something along there, who are there to represent you. And then we also ask if you've ever contacted your state legislators about an issue that you care about. This just helps us gauge kind of involvement and where we're at.
So far, the results are looking really great. I'm excited to see how many people are answering yes to both questions. Awesome, and we'll just give it a few more seconds here before we close the poll. All right. And then can you see the results of the poll on the screen?
I can see it on my screen. Hopefully everyone
Awesome.
can see theirs. But if not, I'll share it. So it looks like 93% of you say that you know who your state representatives and senators are, which is incredible. And then also 83% have contacted their state legislators about an issue that they care about. So I think
wonderful.
Really great news, great numbers.
We're going to get that up to 100% by the end of the webinar. We're going to inspire everybody to get there.
Next webinar, it'll be up.
Yeah. All right, perfect. I'll stop sharing this and turn it back over to you, Emily.
Perfect. So based on that, I also wanted to take a few minutes to just say there's a lot of people who are very deeply involved in policy development, including the two other panelists that you'll hear from after me. But not everybody has the time and resources to dedicate significant amount of time to researching legislation, engaging with stakeholders, and be very deeply involved in policy development. So I just wanted to really share some tips that generally apply across the states that can be very simple, easy ways to engage if you're just looking for a little bit of engagement. To give you a little bit of context, before joining the Every Life Foundation, I had the privilege of working in a state legislature as a staffer, and a core function of that role was to help individuals connect with their state elected representatives through email, on the phone, in-person meetings, and making sure that those messages are passed along and heard and considered. So I just have a few tips that I believe will apply generally across the states when you're looking for that very basic, simple, easy engagement on bills that can be so powerful and effective. So the first tip we have on this top left of the screen is keeping it simple. Like I said before, not everybody has the time to be very deeply involved in issues, but don't underestimate the power that a very simple, well-informed email or phone call can have. Even the shortest personalized emails can have a significant impact. I know working in state policy, and specifically here at the Every Life Foundation, working policy, you come across scenarios where, I can imagine a situation where a legislator would be willing to support a bill, but they're waiting to hear from just one constituent in their district saying that this is an issue that affects them, this is a solution that would benefit them. And sometimes it can be just one email that really can make a big impact to the legislator in policy development. The second point I have on here, don't forget what matters most, sharing your story. Going along with keeping your outreach simple, don't be overwhelmed by the thought that you need to provide all this data or evidence to support your argument. If you have that, it's great and wonderful. But what's most important is that you share your story and how a policy affects you and your life. The next third point I wanted to make is being polite. I think this sounds simple, but in an increasingly virtual world, it can be easy to say things over email that you wouldn't say in person. And don't get me wrong, it's the duty of your elected officials to represent you, and that will not change no matter what you say. But it doesn't hurt to reread emails and think of the impact of certain phrases. Saying something along the lines of, if you don't vote how I want you to vote, I'll never vote for you again, or I don't expect you to read this email, or you've never represented me. While those statements may be true, it can be helpful to think through what you're saying just to make sure aren't any negative statements that may overpower the message of your email. And then the last point that I had on here was just being organized. As you know, states have a mix of full-time and part-time legislatures. Some state sessions are as short as 30 or 40 days. So legislators have the unique responsibility of managing the drafting process, introduction, consideration, and passing of bills, and relating that and creating time to meet with stakeholders, lobbyists, and especially constituents as well. So being organized can really help make sure that your email stays at the top and front center and that it can have the most impact as possible. So I have a drafted email here on the screen, and I just wanted to make some points that can really help quickly get that message across. So we have in the subject line here, I always like to tell people, be sure to include the bill number and a quick summary of the bill. This way, if a senator or a representative gets 300 emails within an hour, they can quickly skim the subject line and they can have that immediate impact of what you want to say, and then they can come back later to refer to it. Also, what I like is the first sentence of this email that I have drafted says, "I'm your constituent from blank county." This can help to set the tone up first, that you're in their county. Legislators get a lot of emails from people who are across the state, but also across the nation. And so it helps to share from the very beginning, make it clearly you are in their district. And also at the bottom of that email, I copy the address as well. A lot of people include the address at the bottom, so it can be a quick way for legislators or staffers to quickly skim through emails, look at the bottom, see the address, and they can sort that through constituent and non-constituent mail. I also wanted to point out in the third paragraph of this email, this third sentence, I have a question here that reads, "Understanding that you may not know how you'll vote on this topic yet, could you please share with me how you plan to support individuals with rare diseases in accessing the services they need via telehealth?" And so I included this because I think it's something that can be beneficial to include a question in your email, because it requires the legislator and their staffer to sit down, think about it, come up with a response. It's also a general question. Sometimes if questions are too specific, if you ask how they plan to vote on a bill or what plan they might to take, you might get a general answer. So it can help to kind of gauge their interest and give the legislator a chance to tell you how they plan to support you. So those are my tips. Thank you all. And if you have any questions about how to best contact your elected representatives, I'm happy to answer those in the panel session.
Thank you so much, Emily, for all of that wonderful information. So helpful. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Betsy Traynor. Betsy Traynor is a corporate attorney for a Northern Virginia defense contractor specializing in laser/leader systems for customers such as the Department of Defense and NASA. She is a mother of 4 and an avid animal lover. She currently sits on the board of directors for the RSACS Foundation based in Canada and spends a large portion of her free time fundraising and networking for the rare disease community. Betsy is also an amateur nature photographer and enjoys visiting and hiking in our nation's great national parks. Thank you so much for joining us, Betsy, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with everyone. So I didn't prepare anything specific today. I'm just going to give you my background and story off the cuff. And as Amanda mentioned, I'm a mom of 4. My daughter, Allison, who's now 23 years old, was diagnosed with a rare progressive neurodegenerative disease that goes by the acronym RSACS. It took me 20 years to find a diagnosis for Allie. So when she was born, we knew at around 16 months old that something was problematic with her motor function, and spent literally the next 20 years seeing doctors and doing genetic testing and reaching out to folks all around the world, trying to find an answer for what was afflicting Allison. In around 2017, I found the name of a doctor in Boston that specialized in cerebellar research. Super famous guy, very hard to get in touch with. And I persistently called his office, asking him to review Allie's medical records for a little over 2 years. And in the summer of 2020, I got a phone call. So this was during the pandemic, that this doctor had finally had the opportunity to review Allie's records, and that he would see her over a telemedicine visit. So on this same computer that I'm chatting with you on, this wonderful neurologist did an exam with me holding this computer up, facing my daughter Allie in this bedroom as she walked around and did different activities for him to view her muscle coordination. And I would hold the screen very, very close to Allie's face, and he would follow her eye movements. And within about literally 15 minutes of that call, he threw out the disease name RSAX. I had been studying rare diseases for 20 years and had not ever heard of this disease, didn't know anything about it. And he ordered some genetic tests and we got our answers. It was unfortunate and a pretty devastating diagnosis for us to receive, because this is a progressive, debilitating disease. But we had a name to it, and it happened through telemedicine. While I certainly think that seeing patients in person is an ideal, it's not always possible. And I look at all the different hospitals and doctors that Allie saw, and it's amazing to me that this all unfolded through telemedicine. So zip forward to the time when everybody just had mentioned that they're changing laws for telehealth. We got a phone call maybe last year, a little bit beyond that, saying, sorry, we can no longer see Allie via telemedicine because of these changes now that the pandemic is over, and insurance companies and state laws are preventing this from happening. So sorry. So the only way we can see you is if you bring Allie to Boston. Part of this disease makes it extremely hard for Allison to travel. She gets really, really dizzy, and although it's possible, it's challenging for her. So that was super, super disappointing news, because I had spent so long trying to find an expert in this area, found one, and technically lost that person. There are no practitioners. I live outside of Washington, D.C. We live near some incredible medical institutions and hospitals, ones I'm sure you're familiar with, Johns Hopkins and the like. None of them had familiarity with this disease. So really the person that we needed was very far from our home in Boston, Massachusetts. So I decided I was going to do some research and find out why this had happened and what was going on with telemedicine. I found the rare disease community, Every Life Foundation, sent a couple emails that way. And several years earlier, I had sent an email to a local Virginia delegate, Kathleen Murphy, about insulin pricing here in Virginia. One of my other children is a type 1 diabetic, and we had seen some pretty drastic changes in insulin costs here in our area. So I had worked with her previously, but it was very, very simple for me to just shoot an email and say, hi, I have this telehealth concern. Is there any way that we can connect? And, you know, I'm not an expert in this area. I don't have a background in legislative issues or policy issues, but Google is amazing. And you can type in, how do I email so-and-so, or I live in this state, who should I reach out to? And with a few clicks, you'll probably get your answer of who you need to connect with. So I wrote an email to the delegate, and she called me instantly. She had actually not only had a daughter with the same name, Allison. Unfortunately, she had recently lost her own daughter to a rare disease, and is very passionate about helping our community. So she jumped right on board. And I think the story behind that is to remember that people that are, elected officials are also real people too, with real families and health issues and stories, and likely more commonality than you would assume. So I made that connection with her. And again, the onus was not on me to come up with a policy or push something to her office. It was really just to collaborate on an issue, and then a team gets together and helps formulate, well, how can we bring this forward? And that's what happened with the telehealth legislation. I believe at the time that we tried to move ours forward, 35 some odd states had joined the compact that was referred to earlier on this call. So although ours did not go through, and we had some opposition from, make sure that I get it right, the Medical Society of Virginia, which is a very powerful medical lobby, and it didn't go through. I am not disheartened by the process, because telehealth is not going away. It's clearly the way of the future. And I think that we will keep, plugging at that issue, and it will be introduced on more occasions. We'll try to hammer out the concerns that some of our opposition had. And it's going to take some time, but I think that we'll get there. And another thing that I wanted to add, and I guess this is more of a general statement for the rare disease community, reaching out to scientists and researchers and people kind of in the rare disease community with a simple email, you will be very surprised at how many people respond quickly. I have emailed researchers around the world. Maybe I read a medical abstract about RSACs, or I see a lab doing research somewhere in the United States, and there's a name at the bottom, and I do a Google search and I find that person and I send a note, and I have made tremendous connections that way. I even was able to get a lab out of UCSF in San Francisco to begin RSACs research only a few days after my daughter was diagnosed, based on a very, very short email. So don't hesitate. Don't think that you're bothering somebody. Don't worry about what the response would be. I just encourage you to make connections and reach out to others in this community, because I think you will be pleasantly surprised at how quickly you get a response, and how if one connection doesn't have an answer for you, it may lead you to another connection. So that is pretty much my story. I think I'm close to running out of time here because it's 12:30, but I'm happy to discuss more details about my journey with Allie with anybody offline, and can provide my contact information certainly through this foundation as well, if anybody has additional questions. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And it looks like we do have a question for you right now, so we can go ahead and do that. Awesome. Okay, so Chandra asks, your daughter's diagnosis sounds like mine, a genetic condition called ataxia type 3. And I have a friend that is type 1 diabetic who just met with our senator to lower insulin prices to $35 a month. Do you think telehealth is beneficial for the rare disease community? I have been in several trials using my laptop?
Yeah, absolutely. So my daughter's condition stands for autosomal recessive spastic ataxia of Charlevoix-Saguenay. It is a genetic condition that we believe originated in Canada, but we're seeing patients all around the world that have this rare disease. I think in the US, there's probably, that I have been able to track down, my guess is 200 families that know they have it, and probably a boatload more that are either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. But the ataxia community overall, telemedicine has been a huge part for us and a huge benefit for us to be able to connect with those few experts that know what's going on with research, have the latest and greatest of maybe we can try this. I don't know if you're familiar, but Friedreich's ataxia, which is an ataxia that more people are familiar with the name, the FDA has just approved the first treatment ever for Friedreich's ataxia. So I think when you have these visits with these providers, they're going to know this kind of niche new information that maybe isn't out there for the rest of the world to view. So absolutely, I think it's a critical part for the rare disease community to stay connected through telemedicine. How's that for a
Thank
long
you.
answer?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Betsy. And I just want to make sure that you see this wonderful comment in the chat from Barbara, just saying that you are such a wonderful advocate for your daughter, Betsy. She says that I found the same responses as I have received. Just keep calling and email, and it is amazing the community you can build.
I appreciate that. And if anybody wants to see Allie's story, we have a website called Action for Allie, and Allie is spelled ALLY. So actionforallie.com. And at the top, there's a pretty new video. We had a professional film company come and do a video, and it shows my collaboration with the Krogan Lab and UCSF and how we met through that quick email, and also gives you a chance to see my brave daughter, Allie, talk about our sex.
Wonderful. Will you drop that URL in the chat, Betsy, once
Absolutely.
you're off camera?
Sure
That would
thing.
be great.
Of course.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer Sills is the president and founder of CSN K2A1 Foundation, an organization devoted to advocating and finding a cure for individuals diagnosed with Oker-Chung neurodevelopmental syndrome. OCNDS is an ultra-rare genetic syndrome that causes severe developmental delay, inability to speak or severe speech delay, autism or autism behavior traits, and epilepsy. She was catapulted into the rare disease world when her daughter was the 6th in the world to be born with OCNDS. Before working with the CSN K2A1 Foundation, she worked as an estate planning and tax attorney, advising local nonprofit organizations on planned giving and fundraising. She received a BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and her JD from Pepperdine University. She resides in Hillsborough, California with her husband, Jason, and their 2 children, Juliet and Jasper, and their mini zoo consisting of 3 cats and 3 dogs. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm actually so happy to meet Betsy via this webinar because we are both telehealth warriors. And RDLA, thank you for being a game changer and providing a platform for rare disease advocates to affect change at the state and federal level that will impact the quality and type of care our families receive and the access to resources they will have. As you mentioned, I'm Jennifer Sills, and I'm the founder and president of the CSN K2A1 Foundation. We formed this organization after our daughter Jules was 6th in the world to be diagnosed with Oker-Chung neurodevelopmental syndrome, also known as OCNDS. OCNDS is an ultra rare genetic condition caused by a mutation in the CSNK2A1 gene. And OCNDS affects every aspect of her life. She's nonverbal, has global developmental delay, hypotonia, autism, and self-injurious behavior in which she injures herself so badly she bleeds through her clothes. But she's more than her diagnosis. She's spicy. Sorry, I get choked up sometimes when I talk about her. She's naughty. She's a budding chef and she loves the beach. And like Betsy, we didn't have as long as a journey of 20 years to find a diagnosis, but it took us 7 years to land on a diagnosis. And I am not an expert in state or federal advocacy. The closest I got to advocacy before my daughter was born was visiting my friends in DC one summer in college when they worked on the Hill and I lived on their couch. And so as we formed this organization, we realized that it is incredibly important, but it isn't our main mission. And we are grateful that there are organizations like RDLA that are organized and have a pulse on what's going on at the state level and in Washington. And we're even more grateful that they allow us to ride their coattails. They do the legwork and they help us along. And whether that's signing on to a letter or identifying important asks for our community to rally around, we really lean on organizations like RDLA. I met Angela Ramirez Holmes, founder of CalRare, at my first Global Genes conference. And there she impressed upon me the importance of rare disease organizations being involved at the state level. So we joined CalRare, and CalRare is a coalition of stakeholders with a goal to raise awareness among the general public and also decision makers such as legislators regarding rare disease. And we would read their social media posts and keep in touch with Angela, but we weren't really involved. However, the pandemic changed this. Our families and those like ours were deeply impacted by the pandemic. And our voice was not even remotely represented in the conversation. Jules's lifeline to the world are her services and school, and they were severely impacted by the closure. My voice and her voice then was completely ignored by our district and community leaders, and I knew we had to do more. So I contacted Angela and I asked her, how could we inform the legislators on the impact the COVID closures were having on our rare disease population? And within weeks, Angela invited me to give testimony to the Rare Disease Caucus on this issue. It felt amazing to finally be heard by people who are making the decisions that impacted Jules's life. And a few weeks later, the legislature made some changes to restrictions as related to special education. And more recently, telehealth has become an important issue to me and our community. Personally, everyone has a North Star on this rare disease journey. Ours happened to be our developmental pediatrician. She had to retire unexpectedly. I forgot, because we've been doing this now for 14 years, Jules is 14, how ridiculously hard it is to find a new provider. I called Stanford to be seen by Dr. Hardin or someone in his practice, and the wait list was 2 years long and they were no longer accepting names. Then I thought, well, we always wanted to be seen by the Mind Institute at Davis, and they told us they couldn't see us because we are in the Sutter Health Network. I even offered to leave the Sutter Health Network, but they still refused to have us as a patient. It then dawned on me, wait, our number one expert in OCNDS, Oker-Chung neurodevelopmental syndrome, is Wendy Chung, Dr. Chung in New York. I'm like, why is Jules not her patient? I called and she said that she would love to see Jules, but because we lived in California and she was only licensed to practice in New York, she couldn't see Jules. And I thought, this is insane. Didn't we learn anything from COVID? Telehealth was a godsend for patients like my Jules. Doctor's appointments are unbelievably stressful for her. She, again, her anxiety is through the roof due to being nonverbal and not being able to communicate her feelings. I mean, her clothes are drenched with blood after these appointments. And organizationally, telehealth is incredibly important to every part of our mission, from diagnosis to care to treatment. And one example for us, among many, but is Center of Excellences. From the beginning, everyone has said, you need a Center of Excellence. But it doesn't make sense for our community to have one dedicated place as a center of excellence. We know this because we host an in-person family conference every year, and our attendance in person is low. Travel is incredibly difficult for our community, whether it's financial considerations or travel with someone who has OCNDS is incredibly difficult due to the symptoms that affect them. In addition, our experts are scattered throughout the US. They don't just live in one building in one hospital. And so an online center of excellence for our community would serve our community best. Again, I called Angela and I told her about our interest in telehealth and wanted to know how I could get involved, how we could affect change. And she thought about it and she told me about the seat that CalRare had on the California Policy Coalition for Telehealth and asked if I'd like to be CalRare's representative on the coalition. And the coalition is dedicated to advancing California's leadership in telehealth policy. And they meet once a month. And I said, yes. So it is a little like the coalition for me is a little bit like starting my rare disease journey all over again. It's a new landscape, a new lexicon, new faces. The learning curve is steep. However, when I went to Rare Disease Week with RDLA in February, one of our asks was telehealth. I was confident in my ask regarding telehealth because I was armed with information and trained by RDLA on how to make an ask. So if you're like me and you're just starting on this advocacy journey, here are a few things that we did to start building relationships with decision makers. And I think we have one more slide. So, I mean, we just have our 2 slides. First is, and you've already done this, you have to find the organizations that are doing the work, and you found RDLA. You are here today, so you're already in the game. Do not reinvent the wheel. They are doing the legwork. You just need to ride their coattails. 2, what we did, we took the time to identify the issues that were important to us personally and then our community. And some of the ways that we did this as a community were we logged the issues that were coming up in our closed Facebook group or in our group discussion. And additionally, if you are a rare disease kind of leader of an organization, do an internal audit to identify your organization's needs with respect to diagnosis, care, and treatment. Figure out what could make it, sorry, the cat was, it's a beauty doing this from home with the cat meowing in the background. But sorry, identify your organization's needs with respect to diagnosis, care, and treatment. Figure out what asks you could make to have and to make it easier, the experience easier for your families to receive a diagnosis, care, and also treatment. 3, I love Google Alerts. Set up Google Alerts to see what's being said about these issues. These are an easy way to stay on top of the news related to issues you're interested in. 4, attend Rare Disease Week in DC. For 5 years, I've wanted to go to Rare Disease Week. This year, all the stars finally aligned for me to attend. I know it takes a ton of planning, but it's worth it. Unlike when you visit doctors, I found that the staffers and legislators actually listen. They were interested and they wanted to help. You also meet others in your state who are advocating for change. And I would recommend that if you do go there, follow up with your staffers and legislators that you meet. That you meet. 5, attend a webinar on how to make an ask. It is really important to know how to make an ask. Just saying that this is an important issue isn't enough to move the needle. Your legislators and staffers want to help you, but they can't help you unless you tell them what you need them to do. 6, find your state's version of Angela Ramirez Homes and CalRare. Tell them what you're interested in and ask them for opportunities to get involved. And 7, I would recommend that you get organized. Create a 1-pager about your organization or your disease and detail the asks that you're making. The 1-pager makes you take a hard look at your disease and your organization. It really makes you do an internal audit to figure out which one of the asks will really move the needle for your patient group? As you can see, I am not an expert. I too am learning, and I'm just getting my toes wet in state advocacy waters, but I can say I'm happy that I did. When I gave testimony to the Rare Disease Caucus, I felt heard, I felt empowered, and I felt like I was helping to move the needle. And on this journey, I don't have many situations where I leave feeling that way. And I thank RDLA for this opportunity, and I look forward to seeing you all in the trenches.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was so helpful and so detailed, and thank you for that step-by-step guide for how to get involved. Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you again to talk a little bit about opportunities to engage.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a few bills that we're seeing in the states. There are many, many other bills than this, but just a few. If you live in these states listed, you can engage, learn more about the bills, and potentially reach out to your elected representatives in support. So again, these are all state level bills. On the telehealth scope, we have 5 interstate medical licensure compact bills coming up in 5 states, multiple bills. But if you live in any of these states, Hawaii, Missouri, North Carolina, New Mexico, New York, you are welcome to look into the bills listed and reach out to your representatives. In the other category, there is a newborn screening bill in Texas, a formulary committee transparency bill in Minnesota, and there's also copay accumulator bills in California, Missouri, North Dakota, and Rhode Island. And I do know, shout out to North Dakota, that bill's moving along really quickly. So if you live in North Dakota, might want to pay attention to this bill, maybe reach out to your representatives. So that's my shout out. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Emily. And now we're opening it up for questions. I invite Jennifer and Betsy to join us back on camera. And if you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A box. And if you'd like to specify it to a certain panelist, please feel free to do so. And while we're, all right, here we go. All right, and while we're waiting for more questions in the chat, I'll just shout out Randy has dropped some information in the chat about a bill in Ohio. So I'll just read this out for everybody. She says, Ohio has a newly added amendment to our state budget for copay accumulator ban. If you are interested in testifying, feel free to reach out to her. Testimony's next week, so she's dropped her email in there. So thank you so much, Randy, for dropping that there. Hope that there's some Ohioans on the call. All right, well, we're not getting any questions so far, but I'll keep an eye on it. But would any of you, like to add any more, tidbits about how to get involved as an advocate or anything like that?
I think there was one question that says, does RDLA have a webinar on how to make an ask?
Oh, yes. Thank you for seeing that in the chat. Thank you, Jennifer. So yes, we do. And I can go grab the link for that. We do have a recorded webinar there. And then before any of our, before Rare Disease Week, we always do a webinar specifically on that. And we go into breakout sessions and work on developing that together. And then similarly, our next slide will be about upcoming events and opportunities to get involved with. And so if there is any folks from Wisconsin on this call, we're doing a Wisconsin Rare Disease State Advocacy Day next month. And before that Advocacy Day, we will also have a similar webinar where we go over how to share your story, go into breakout sessions and practice that. So yeah, it's definitely a very important skill, but not as, it doesn't need to be intimidating. It's everybody can do it. You just have to have a little bit of practice.
Amanda, we did get a question about how to shorten your rare disease story when you've had a long odyssey. And I think the best thing that has worked for me, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but it took me a while to really come up with a template that I could cut and paste each time I was reaching out to somebody, because I reach out on the legislative end, but it's also really hard because I'm trying to fundraise. And it's hard I'm not good at asking, and I've learned how important it is to learn to ask, because my family can't cure RSACs alone. And so really try to shorten it to a paragraph. And so all of the details of your rare disease journey are critical and important, but not everybody has the time to read through those details. And that is not lessening the importance of your background information. But for me, I don't even write out what Allie's disease stands for. And I try to use terms maybe that other people will understand. Describing RSACs is challenging because it's actually quite different for so many of the people that have this rare genetic condition. So how it's showing up in Allie could be very different. So when I describe RSACs, I say it's a combination of muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, and ALS, all wrapped up into one lousy disease. Those are diseases that most people have heard of. And something else I've also had to balance when I explain rare diseases is that Allie's going to see this. She's 23 years old, and it's pretty devastating for her to see some of this information about this disease. And it's not that she's sticking her head in the sand, but she just wants to live well while she can. And an example of that is UCSF sent out a national flyer about our family. So it was our family's picture, and it was a description of the disease. And in it, it had some pretty devastating facts. Although those facts were accurate, I chose to say, no, please don't include that information. One, we don't know what cures might be around the corner. So I'm not going to write, it's a balancing act because you want people to understand how serious your condition is. But I have to also balance what that is like for my rare disease young woman that has to deal with the emotions of what might be coming with her disease. So that's a little bit off of what you asked me, but basically pare it down into here's the name, and here's a little bit about it, and this is what I'm looking for in this email. And when you have a chance to talk to those people in person, that's when hopefully you'll have a chance to share a little bit more of those important details of your story, if you're comfortable with that. So that's my answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Betsy, for that. And I think we had a great comment in the chat that I'd just like to read out. So they say, in my experience, going in as a parent without all the answers is incredibly impactful, and they are willing to help. I have a lobbying background, and I noticed the difference between a professional going in and a passionate parent. Don't be afraid to be bold when telling them why you care about the issue. I think that's a great observation. Thank you.
I can tell a cute story of my type 1 diabetic daughter. Riley participated in Children's Congress, which is something through JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, many years ago. And they went into Congress and they kind of had all of these little breakout sessions where they could speak to particular Congress people. And one of the congressmen that was supposed to meet with my daughter's group came by and leaned in and said, "I'm sorry, I've got another meeting to go to, but I'll get my picture taken with you guys." And my daughter, who was probably around 11 at the time, smiled for the picture. And then when the congressman walked away, said in a very polite way, "I didn't come here for my picture. I came here to tell this congressman how important my issue is." The staffer heard my daughter's comment, went after the congressman, told him, and he came back into the room and said, "You're right. It's not just a picture op. I'm supposed to be here to listen to you, young lady. Tell me what your concerns are." And so I was super proud. She did it in a polite way, but it's important to be heard. It's not just a photo op, it's your life and your story. And sometimes people get busy with their lives and they forget that that's the critical part of this whole movement.
Thank you. Awesome. And we have a comment from Jackie in the Q&A box that I'll read out. She says, "Hi, Jackie from SINGAP Research Fund. Great presentation. Just wanted to add that some decision makers aren't in the legislature, and another useful angle is to use the other disability organizations to help change policy within hospitals or within community support structures. For example, we were able to develop IDD-specific protocols for emergency department stabilization without having the long ordeal of passing a new bill, but through cooperation of the disability organizations and VUMC." So great comment there. Thank you, Jackie. Any comments from our panelists on that or anything else? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go to our last slide here about upcoming events. So please take a look at this. This is also all on our website already or will be posted on our website soon. So tomorrow is our deadline for the Rare Is Scholarship Fund application. So if you or anyone you know would be interested in participating in that, please take a look at that. April 20th is our next monthly RDLA webinar. May 1st is when applications will open for our virtual Youth and Teen Advocacy Day, which will take place on June 22nd. May 8th is when Rare Across America applications will open, and Rare Across America this year is taking place August 7th to 18th. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our Wisconsin Rare Disease State Advocacy Day taking place on May 17th. Registration is currently open, so please take a look on our website if you live in Wisconsin and would like to take part in that. And thank you again so much for all of our panelists for joining today's webinar, and to all of our attendees. We really appreciate you either starting or continuing on your state advocacy journey with us today. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.